Okay, first item on the agenda is the discussion of the housing needs assessment that Noel Anderson, our community planner director, is going to present. And I know that we've got good backup because INRCOG is here. So
Those
you're
masked people.
safe, Noel.
The masked people in the audience.
Yeah.
Yes. Noel Anderson, Community Planning Development Director, and as you just noted in the introduction, we've been working on the housing needs assessment. We've been working with the Iowa Northland Regional Council of Governments, so they're going to give you a presentation today on our progress.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. With apologies for sending you a big document with such a short notice.
Could you introduce yourself?
I will. I'm Brian Schoen with the INRCOG office. I'm the Director of Development, and with me today is Rose Phillips, and she's the primary author of the document. And as Noel indicated, we've been working on this document with a number of different groups and a number of different entities along the way. It has taken a considerable amount of time, but it is full of information. So, if there's anything I can suggest to you is that if you like statistics and you like numbers, there's all kinds of them in there. But there are also some shortcuts and some executive summaries and some other things in terms of what you may find if you go through the actual housing needs assessment. And so we've got a slideshow here. I think there we go. So real quickly, we've been working primarily with the planning department, community development department on a housing needs assessment. Back some years ago, these were a requirement for a lot of programs, not unlike a few other planning documents that we had worked on. In this case, housing needs assessments are typically encouraged and brought forward at a local level, and that's what the City of Waterloo has done here. They had asked us to do that, and we've actually had opportunity to use information out of this draft as your community development department move forward with what's known as a consolidated plan for the community development block grant program. Likewise, I know there has been interest in this document with regard to developers, development, Chamber of Commerce. We've had a lot of opportunity, to talk about pieces and parts of this document. So if we can do anything, we'd like to encourage you to take the time to look through it and just see what we found. Again, the cover looks like this. The last time you had gone through this process is about 10 years ago. There have been changes, as you might imagine, just not only with a pandemic, but also just changes in the housing market. The housing market looks vastly different than what it did 11 years ago in all of our communities. Again, there's all kinds of data, all kinds of information in there. We're waiting for the new information still from 2020. We know the redistricting numbers have started to fall out, but we're waiting on numbers for the local districts or the local jurisdictions and to include housing information. So that's something that we'll certainly talk about. As you go through the document, you'll note that some of the information does have a little age to it. And again, we'll talk about that as we kind of move forward. Okay, so housing needs assessment is pretty much what you'd expect of it. Pretty much what you see is what you get. What we look at is the quality of units, the quantity of units. We look at affordability and we look at availability. We're going to look at wages as they're attached to can you afford to live in the unit? How much per hour do you have to make in order to afford some of the prices that are out there? Likewise, housing is broken down into a number of different areas. You know probably better than we do that there are a number of tax credit programs that are attached to housing. And so certainly we've got the first one listed there in workforce housing tax credits. That was replenished with funds. There are two programs, one for larger communities, one for smaller. And that is one of the reasons why we are doing these studies for our communities. Again, these are driven locally by typically the city council or the economic development commissions, but there's generally a purpose, meaning there's a lack of housing for their workers. They can't bring in more workers. The condition of units may be suffering. The number of units may be decreasing, or we've got other changes in the housing market that we're trying to address. So again, as you look at the plan overall, you're going to see a number of projections about supply and demand with regard to housing. And then also, obviously, this is intended to help guide residential development in the community. So Again, applications, and we had talked about that again as well. So certainly it has a purpose. As was noted, we worked with a number of different entities, one of which was the GROW Committee as part of the city, along with your planning staff and your community development staff, and sat down actually through a series of meetings with them. We were actually on the agenda a number of different times, and had an opportunity to talk to not only financial institutions, but also realtors, bankers, so on and so forth, as well as be a part of the policy discussions that go along with your CLURA program, your CURA program, and all those other incentives that you are utilizing to try and incent housing in the community. Again, we're going to look at a lot of the data that's out there, but we're also going to talk to a lot of people that are involved in housing as well too. And you'll see there's a pretty lengthy list of the persons, individuals, and agencies that Rose has reached out to. First and foremost, obviously, is census, but we're also going to look at multiple listings, MLS, real estate listings, and those kinds of things. Again, primarily because those are newer. We have access then to database from HUD and a few other places as well too. Certainly, Iowa Workforce Development is a very credible source. So you will find the document is full of information, and these are the people then that we've had conversations with, either formally, informally, email, in person, either at the GROW Committee, the Planning Commission meetings, or otherwise about housing in the community. So certainly a pretty good cross-section from developers to financial institutions to educational institutions, as well as agencies that serve the community. So we were looking at not only just perhaps what you think of, whether it's rental property or site-built homes, but we were also looking at accommodations for seniors, for persons with disabilities, as well as other persons with special needs in the community. Some of the highlights, and I won't go through the highlights with you. There are lots of graphs, lots of charts in the document itself. What you'll see then is that we certainly have needs. Nothing new to anybody else here, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Housing needs. Our region, we serve a 6-county area, and our region has very similar needs in terms of, if you look at vacancy percentages, most of our single-family vacancy rates at a county level are running somewhere about 2%. So really, we have very little vacancy rates. Our rental vacancies are somewhere in the 8 to 10%, which is considered normal. Again, not out of line, but certainly affecting price in terms of housing in the communities. So you'll note that there are limited inventories and that we've got an aging housing stock. So when you look at it, one thing that always jumps out at me is, and it's a census-driven figure, and that is the number of units that are or were constructed prior to 1939. That percentage in the city of Waterloo is a little over 25%. So a quarter of the housing stock is pushing 80 years in age. So certainly something to draw your attention to. So that is one of the things that we have to wrestle with as part of this process. And so Rose was even doing projections, or one of the things you'll see is that as she did projections, that even without population growth or change, we're still going to need additional units, because we've got those units that are aging out. We've got smaller household sizes. We've got a number of other things that are going to drive the need for additional units. So it's not necessarily just people that are in migration or out migration that affect housing. So again, you'll go through and you'll see what average rents are and average price of homes are, as well as median incomes. You'll see what demand is, and then you'll have an opportunity then to look through, again, when you go through the document and look at the summary, that we do have needs in the community. If you look at if people are having difficult time affording the housing that they're in, and how much of their paycheck does it take, and what do they have to earn at an hourly wage in order to pay for a median-priced apartment, single bedroom apartment. What does that cost in the community? And can you afford that based on the wage? So we've tried to do some analysis there for you as well. There are 7 goals. Those of you that aren't familiar with goals and objectives, these are the broad statements that are intended to be all-encompassing. These appear at the back of the document. So remember, I told you if you wanted to do the Cliff Notes thing and hop ahead, you can run to the back of the doc. These 7 goals are at the back. There are then actions or objectives underneath each one of them that provide additional direction for housing, some of which are very conventional and some of which have a little bit more thought to them in terms of new, unique, best management practices kinds of things. So, and then some of them obviously are affected by, as the conversation was moving forward here a little bit earlier, they're affected by the state government because some of these programs are handed down to us through the state. So we've got some perhaps limitation as to what we can and what we can't do. And one of those, for example, that will drop right now is the land banking concept. There's been legislation in the legislature for the last couple of years to allow for land banking. It's creation of what amounts to, in essence, a nonprofit organization then that can hold property as well as turn property over, get it back into private hands, get it back on the tax rolls. And how that organization then survives is then through a portion of the taxes that come back on the property once it's redeveloped. And we know that Waterloo runs a very stout 657A program, but we know that you've probably got a lot of properties that you in fact own or are responsible for or manage. And that is one way that we could turn those lots or those particular properties back into tax generating and redeveloped properties in the community. And so unfortunately, that legislation hasn't gone anywhere, but at least it's gotten some airplay and we think it'll be back because it is very popular. Other states have it, and it does require state enabling legislation for local governments to do it. So again, you'll see comments in there about land banking and some of those kinds of things. Okay, so the goals, again, real quick, I'll just probably give you kind of a snapshot of those. Certainly we want to address the quality wherever and whenever we can. We support infill. Everybody knows what infill development is. It's the lot that's got the utilities, the services, the transportation, and all of those kinds of things. It's just a matter of redeveloping it. Sometimes those are the easiest properties to resurrect, if you will. We looked at certain income categories, low and moderate income. Those of you that have heard that term LMI, low and moderate income, it's 80% of the area median, which is the county median. That's a factor that we that work in the CDBG world track pretty heavily, and that's a number that is used pretty commonly when it comes to HUD as well as state government and federal government. So then market rate development, we didn't forget about that. We certainly know that we want to see more market rate development housing. There have been great strides made on a number of these things. As you look at these goals, you're probably thinking of different projects. So certainly there have been strides made towards achieving these goals. We look at things more comprehensively from the standpoint of community development, workforce development. All those things relate to housing. I know some communities will ask us as staff if we're supportive of housing in terms of an economic development endeavor, and of course the answer is yes. It has an effect on economic development in one way, shape, or form in many cases. And so certainly that's how we look at things. And then also we looked at infrastructure and talked a lot about the infrastructure in the community for supporting those types of growth and development patterns. So what we came up with kind of as the guiding principles at the end is that, it's a balanced approach, which some people may refer to as an incremental approach, meaning you take it a piece at a time. It doesn't typically happen in large swaths. It happens a little bit at a time, which is what makes the idea or the concept of a plan just that much more important, right? So that you've got it in front of you in terms of where you're headed and where you're going. So certainly responsibilities for doing this don't just fall on your staff or our staff or any one entity. This process, this procedure, in terms of improving housing in the community is something that's going to take a lot of folks. When we've talked to a number of our communities about housing, one of the first things we'll tell them is that if housing was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? We wouldn't have the shortage of housing. We wouldn't have the concerns that employers have. We wouldn't have concerns that school districts have. We wouldn't have anything dealing with housing that was a concern, right? So certainly it's going to take a lot of different angles for housing to occur. It's going to take a lot of different funding mechanisms. It's not just all out of one pot or all out of one department. It's certainly a collaborative kind of thing, and so certainly we recognize that, and you do probably as well. We've identified a number of housing sources. There are programs listed in tables in the document that you can take a look at that relate just to housing, and some of those are federal, state, and or local. And certainly there are other organizations such as the Waterloo Housing Trust Fund and a few other places that also serve a common interest that we're talking about here with regard to housing. So it's not just the City Council, there's the Waterloo Housing Trust Fund, the Community Development Board, all of them are going in the same direction that you are when it comes to housing. So the document in terms of overall is really, the GROW Committee has seen it a number of different times. They are then pushing it up, if you will, for consideration. It is not on your agenda, so you can have all the time you need to read through it, go through it, but certainly would appreciate that. Staff has gone back and forth with the drafts of this document, both community development and planning, over the past couple of months with regard to the recommendations, the goals, and those kinds of things as well. We've been augmenting new information wherever we can, and we think we've got a lot of the newest policies in there as it relates to 657A and reuse of property and those kinds of things as well too. So, and that.
Brian, is this document complete, or are you and Rose still working on it? And specifically wondering, are you going to try to get any of the new census information in there?
What Rose and I were kind of talking about a little bit before the meeting today was that what could happen is if the document needs to move forward, and that may be related to tax credit application or something of that nature, that then we could go back in and update stats as they become available. Not knowing when that's going to be, how long do we sit, in terms of putting the plan in place. We know we can always go back and readjust those stats and rerun some of the projections.
So you'd be willing to have an amendment to it or something to
certainly
update and incorporate those census? That would be great.
Yep, certainly that we would want to look at you having the most current information. This is what we have right now.
Yeah.
And so without getting in the way of anybody or getting it put in place, then certainly we can always come back. I think the stats will start to come out probably in the next couple of months. I'm going to guess by the first of the year is kind of what we're being told, is that where we'll see figures for housing, income, employment, all the stuff that is really very critical when it comes to not only housing needs assessment, but a lot of the plans and documents that we do.
Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do I? Oh, okay. Okay, so a couple things. First of all, Brian, going to the dilapidated housing meeting, try to go at least once a month. You find out all this information regarding the different houses and that are in bad shape to the point where they've become 657A eligible, or they even become targets. And that has gone on for years and years and years. No, I don't know. How long have we had 657A?
I would say probably since about 2004.
Okay, so, I mean, we're 17 years going into this. And one of the things that I have seen from the various pieces of information that's come our way sitting on council is that there's that crack. There's those people that don't have the money to pay for it, but they are above the guidelines to meet many of these programs, and that's been a recurring problem. And I've not seen any answer to that as to how you meet the needs of that, so that those homes that need that kind of repair can get it, rather than turn it into a 657A property as the people age out. Maybe they've already aged out and they don't have any relatives or whatever the situation might be. I think that's understood. So I haven't seen that, and I don't see that in any of this either, addressing that need. But the other thing is looking at the possible funding sources. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You got 9 different sources there. And has there been a thought of asking each one of these sources, if not even more, to invest just a small percentage of whatever that is and have an amalgam of all those different funding sources so that people aren't saying, well, we got to look at the Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program and that's what we're going to go with. Rather have that collection of 9, 10, 12, whatever people put in a certain amount, sort of like the whole concept involved with Schmid downtown, where you have people investing. And if these funding sources could do that, that could create a pot of money that possibly could be used for those people that are falling through the cracks. So.
A couple of just reaction comments back, Pat, if I might. Certainly, some of the funding sources that are listed there will come with rules and requirements, and you're required to keep them segregated and for a specific, whether it's an income category or a specific purpose or whatnot. And so those programs end up being kind of where we're at in terms of being able to apply. From the standpoint of just one entity that we've been involved with for a number of years, and that's the Waterloo Housing Trust Fund. That is a nonprofit organization. It carries your name, Waterloo Housing Trust Fund. It's got a very good cross-section of persons. The money is allocated through the state legislature. Real estate transfer tax coming back, Pat, as well as some dollars from a RIF fund. And that money is allocated then based on population to the trust funds, and that comes directly back into your community. So, for example, what that means is for a 2-year cycle, each grant being 2 years, that group gets about between $200,000 and $250,000. When you add the Iowa Finance Authority, which is the award from the legislature, to the local dollars, that comes back directly through agencies for rehabilitation and those kinds of things that are local. Again, these dollars being state dollars. So they don't always carry the federal baggage with them or the federal requirements in terms of accessing them. So the more we look at the Waterloo Housing Trust Fund, I think there are going to be some options and alternatives there for the city. It's something that is relatively new, was just put together in about 2012, actually became a recognized trust fund in 2014, so has just a half a dozen years under its belt. If we could look at the land banking concept, certainly that would be of benefit. But the local dollars, if there's one way that we can probably affect some of this, is expenditure of dollars at a local level, and in particular local dollars. And what we've done in a few communities where they are using tax increment finance for housing purposes, there are dollars that come back to the city if they do market housing that goes into what they call a set-aside. Those set-aside dollars then can be allocated by the local government for LMI projects, low and moderate income projects, with not a lot of description and requirement back with them. And so what we've done is we've set up small repair programs in some of those communities, Pat, where people can apply directly to the city for small repair, $7,500, $10,000, $5,000, whatever the city is willing to put together. They have to income qualify, certainly, because that's what the Iowa Code requires, but it gives them an opportunity to define the scope of the project. So it's specific to their house, whether it's windows, roof, whatever it is. But there's an opportunity to use some of those dollars, reuse some of those dollars coming back into the community that may have been created for another purpose. Again, I know TIF and housing isn't something that all communities use, but it is something that we have done in a number of other communities. So, but you're right. The local dollars are the thing that you would have the most authority and maybe the most ability to see some change, but don't want to lose sight of the fact that we need local dollars to match those federal and state dollars a lot of times. And so the 4 instances, that Waterloo Housing Trust Fund example, for every $4 that we get from them, we for every $1 of ours, we leverage 4 of theirs. So we get $5, and 1 is at a local level, and 4 then is our state dollars. So that's a pretty good return when you think about that, and it is being turned right out into the agencies. Typically, there are about 8 or 9 agencies, one of which is your community development department, that accesses those funds, and they augment their rehab programs with those dollars, make them go further.
Mr. Mayor, if I could follow up.
We'll
Okay.
see- Yeah, then we'll see if other folks have questions too after you get done.
Well, according to all the census stuff Brian, have looked at, in Iowa especially, there's been population further shift from people moving out of the rural areas into the cities. And that would definitely increase the need for more housing. And we don't know for sure the socioeconomic status of all those people moving in to the cities and what that's going to mean for the type of housing that everybody's going to need. So I guess the reason why I'm saying that is I would hope that the federal and state government will relax or change some of their rules that apply to people and how they have to become eligible to receive those kinds of funds so that they can have a roof over their head.
Yeah.
And so that they can keep having a roof over their head. And maybe you can have some sway with the governor or a legislature or the Congress or the president or whatever.
I'm just thinking about the coalition papers, Sharon, that go out to Washington, D.C., and there's one on housing always that goes in every year. And in there, Pat, somewhat innocuously, there's phrase or statement that gets to the fact about take it easy on the requirements. That if it's possible, if you could ease up on some of the requirements so that we could use the funds at a local level for reasons that are locally driven, that we might go further with the dollars. We might do better things. We might pick the good projects rather than these projects are ready to go kind of thing. And so we may make better decisions ourselves. But that's always been carried in there for the last handful of years, and the reason I know that is I think I probably was responsible for writing it. So, but be that as it may, it is something that comes up. The rules and the requirements are certainly something that create a challenge.
All right, we got a couple more minutes. Council, anyone else with questions?
Well, I'd have one other thing.
Okay, well,
Anyone else?
Oh, thank you.
let me ask one in this, Brian. It's an unfair question, so I tell you that right up front. I know INRCOG has dealt with NIMBY, not in my backyard, for years. It's consistent across the board, not just certainly in Waterloo. And the question of how do we deal with that is unfair because it's a political question, and I realize that. But have you come up with any method to deal with that in such a way? I mean, we're dealing with it right now, and I'm not sure how to address it.
Yeah.
Tips from the pro.
Yeah. NIMBY is one. There are a whole list of these acronyms now, right? CAVE people, Citizens Against Virtually Everything. Bananas was the one I heard last time, and that's build absolutely nothing anywhere near anywhere. And so somewhat a bit of sarcasm, I think, probably in the comments, but it is really an issue. And so having policy documents in place certainly is the foundation or the basis, right? And then the programs and or the ordinances and the pieces that help implement the policy, and then consistent following of those plans and ordinances. Now, will that keep you out of trouble all the time? No. If you have to go across the street to the courthouse and appear then for court, certainly following your adopted policies, procedures, ordinances, requirements puts you in better standing for deciding, one at a time or willy-nilly or inconsistently. So that's the first thing, is making sure that you do what you can to try and put together the best policy, knowing full well that the levels of government above you may not like them. But then also making sure that you draft the regulations, give the tools then for everybody, your staff primarily, to implement those for you. And so hopefully you stay consistent. That's really the big thing. Pushing back against the NIMBYs, I wish I had an answer for that. Politics does play a role in this. And so I get that as well too. And from our standpoint, best is kind of best. We're going to try and put your best foot forward, and we're going to put our best foot forward. And if somebody decides to do something differently or don't agree, then that's certainly their choice. So we're an extension of staff. But we fight it all the time. I've tried to change the minds, Sharon. You probably know this better than anybody
years.
of people, and it just doesn't work. Sometimes you might make a little bit of inroad, but sometimes you're not going to get very far. You're not going to change their minds. So the best is the
But
best.
you bring up a great point, and Noel, do we have a policy that we follow on where new housing is gonna go? Is that something that maybe this housing needs assessment could help us develop if we don't?
I mean, we have the zoning map, so there's certain
Yeah.
sites that are zoned for development. There's some areas in the city that are still zoned agricultural, so that would take further actions. Of course, we have in the comprehensive plan, we have several maps that'll show the infrastructure. So, for the most part, developers want to go where existing infrastructure is there or easy to be extended to it. So the infrastructure probably guides it as much as the zoning does in terms of finding new housing sites. And then also we work on infill sites. We work in a great partnership with the Waterloo schools for a lot of their older sites and trying to get those redeveloped, like the former Irving School looks tremendous now. So we try to go where there's infrastructure, where the zoning is correct. But there's also other opportunities out there. And as I think as developers look for more housing types, more housing opportunities to meet those different levels of income needs and different buyers out there, they're going to try new housing types. And we try to review those and recommend as we can to get them to happen. But
So our baseline, though, is the zoning. I mean, if
Zoning and
something is
infrastructure.
zoning for multi-family housing, even if it's next door to single family, we don't have anything that guides us in the difference there.
And I would say that you could probably go to any community and find that multifamily housing is a lot more difficult to find sites for because a lot of single-family homes will not want it next to them. And it's a matter of trying to create that design, that buffer, that transition area to kind of go from commercial to multifamily to single-family and, the residential and commercial areas.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take
Thank you,
one
Brian.
question, then we got to get to Jamie and Mr. Amos.
Mr. Mayor, this is for Noel, I guess, listening to the conversation. And one of my questions is, okay, like in the Walnut neighborhood, we have the mixed housing to where you have more expensive homes and less expensive. I received a call from a gentleman who was talking about exactly that in other areas of the city. And his concern is the impact that it would have putting a more expensive home into a residential area with the less expensive homes. Noel, can you speak to that a little bit as far as if that's a
He
positive or
didn't
negative?
want it? He didn't want it, or?
He did not want it.
And we had that, if you go way back, I think it was probably around 2000, I think we built, with Operation Threshold, we built some homes on Mobile area. And a lot of the homeowners around there didn't want the new expensive homes coming because their homes were valued lower. They didn't want to sell, so they didn't want to make money selling them. They wanted to have low taxes and all that. And so, that's obviously something that we have to be, I guess, cognizant of as we work on these areas and go back and try to look, maybe a couple years later, how that impacts them, working with the county assessor to try and find out ahead of time what kind of impacts it's going to have on those areas. Obviously, we'd like to see everybody's neighborhood stabilized. We'd like to see them all growing up and increasing in value. But there is that other side of it where, someone that's planning to live in their house for the next 20 years doesn't want their value to go up because they don't want to see an increase in taxes based on value. Even if the levy rate goes down, it could still go up. So that's something we just have to kind of watch as we're working to improve neighborhoods.
Yeah, and let's move on, but thank you so much for all your efforts, for all your work. I know it's a huge job, but, housing is incredibly important, and we know that with some of this transportation dollars, that housing and housing infrastructure is going to be a big part of that too. So having this done gives us the necessary background for us to be able to tap into some of these programs on a federal level. So thank you so much for all your work as well, Mr. Morrissey.
I just wanted to add that it's unconscionable for Waterloo not to sponsor a warming center for the homeless in the winter.
Can I thank that young lady that sounds like did
He's the
all the
author.
work? Stand up and introduce yourself.
I'm Rose Phillips. I'm a housing planner with INRCOG. So I
Thank you for your work.
appreciate the interest and the reception.
All right, thank you, Rose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you, Brian.
Yay.
For your time. Appreciate it.
And you'll get us that census stuff, Brian, right?
Yeah, 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, our 15, 20 months, yeah.
Oh, Brian, and really quickly too, you just, I think maybe just a comment more or less, but in a person's lifetime, the largest investment that what percentages of people have will be their own home, right? And so when we take a look at that value, and if that's going to be their largest purchase, you definitely want to see that appreciate in value. It's a challenge with regards to the taxes, but you definitely want to see the value of your home increase. So,
Yeah, for lots of reasons. It's a wealth building tool for the individuals that own the home too. Yeah, that's exactly right.